So this training session is geared towards circulation, and I'd like folks to chime in if they think of something they want to cover. Otherwise, I will just go through some circulation functions. Anything that the group would like to start with? Okay, if you think of something, chime in. Something that came up yesterday was, and I didn't cover it, was how to add group members in the web client. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my patron record. Search for patrons. Double click. Okay, so I have my patron record up here. If I go down to group member details, you see that there is nothing displayed. If I refresh the screen, it shows me now as a member of my own group. That refresh is not going to be necessary in the future. It's a bug that has been resolved in a future version of Evergreen. So now if I select my record and go to Actions, I have the ability to move another patron to this group. Okay, and it's asking me for the patron barcode, which I actually don't have off the top of my head. So I'm going to click on Cancel. I'm going to go ahead and open up a new tab. So you can control click on the search for patrons or do a right click and open link in a new tab. Okay, and I'm going to search for a couple of my kids to add them in, just as a test scenario. Okay. Okay, so Jennifer's barcode is right here. So I'm going to grab that. Come over here to Actions, move another patron to this group. Enter her barcode, click OK. It asks me to confirm that action. I'm going to say Move User. And now you see that there's 2 members in this group. And if I redisplay my patron record, you now see that under Group Finds, it's showing the dollar from Jennifer's record. Any questions? It's a very quiet group. Okay. So that's a brief overview of how to add group members in, and a reminder that you need to click on that refresh to see the group or see the one individual who doesn't have any other group members yet. Okay, so I was going to look at registering a new patron. Okay, so the fields in yellow are the required fields. that need to be filled in. One of the things that I wanted to go over that's different in the web client is the date of birth. It's now expecting year, month, day. And so if you go to enter it a different way, it shows in red and will not save. But if you enter the date correctly, it changes to black, indicating that it's the correct format. One of the things that I hope to do is add an example over here to the right so that that's more clear. One of the other things I wanted to cover in the patron registration is that there's a primary identification type, along with primary identification, a secondary identification type. In the desktop staff client, we used to have this as the parent's name, and you can still do that in the web client, but one of the changes that's coming with the upgrade is that there's going to actually be a separate field for patron's name, and you won't have to use this secondary identification type and field, an ID field to put the name in. There'll be a fixed field that will contain that information. And so anything as a part of the upgrade, we'll have to figure out which of these secondary identification types and IDs that we want to move over into that parent field so that it populates the parent field for you after the upgrade. So just a heads up on that. Any questions so far about the registration? Okay. Privilege expiration date. I am guessing that this is something that will the reason it doesn't have the expiration date filled in is because I haven't chosen a profile group. If I choose full privileges, it will put in a default date of 3 years from today, and it does have it in the same format that the birth date is year, month, day. Another thing that I went over yesterday was under user settings. There's some default notifications for phone and email. If you wanted to add the SMS, you could. And then you just fill in this information for the patron. See, mailing, all of that's pretty much the same. Looking for things that might be different. Email checkout receipts by default. Obviously, this is a patron preference. Something you could ask the patron when they're registering whether they want to get their checkout receipts automatically emailed to them. Why do we have internet access level as required? That's a good question, Heidi. I don't believe, part of me is wondering whether it is set for, I'm logged in as a LeGrand Public Library workstation, and I don't know whether it's going to be that for everyone. Let me go ahead and look at something. Okay, let's look at This is sidetracking a little bit. I was going to see if I could tell. Because in the past that has not been required. For those of you who are using the web client now, is it required for your login? Okay, so Heidi checked on her login and it's not required. So my guess is that this was something that Legrand Public required. And these are where those kind of things are set. So I will look into that for the purposes of Legrand, but it's reassuring to find out that it's not something that everybody's seeing. It may be a requirement for Legrand because of their public use terminals and wanting to have that set for each of their patrons. Okay, so were there any additional questions about patron registration? Should I get back into there? Okay, we can always hop back in there if somebody thinks of something. One of the other functions in the circulation menu is the retrieve last patron. So what it should do is it should bring up my record since that was the last one that was in there. If I wanted to make any changes, I would just click on edit. I don't know that okay. Another function is pending patrons. This has to do with a feature that I don't believe anybody has turned on at this point, but the ability for patrons to register online. And then the home library of that potential patron would come in here and look at pending patrons and approve them or disapprove them. It's an interesting feature we just haven't turned on. Oh, Heidi has, sorry. So Heidi, how is that feature working for you? Oh, okay. So it appears as if there's a communication issue with having to clear out the pending because she doesn't always get notified if somebody comes in later. So that may be just a workflow issue we're going to have to work on. Maybe there's a report that we can generate that compares the pending list with new patrons that were added. So we might be able to do something to improve that. But it's good to know that somebody's using the feature because other libraries may want to start using it as well. User buckets is a brand new feature with the upgrade that we did. The buckets allow you to do group actions on patrons, which is something we haven't been able to do before. So yes, I'm very happy about it, and it looks like Heidi is as well. She's saying it's awesome in the chat. So there's either pending user view or bucket view. I could add my barcode to this bucket. Okay. It's now in a pending user area. If I wanted to, I could add this to a bucket, or I could clear the item out of my list. So if I click on Add to Bucket, okay. I have to choose a bucket first. Thanks, Heidi. I haven't used this enough to have this workflow down pat. So we have this bucket drop-down box, and it has either new bucket or there's some other buckets that I've created. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select new bucket, and I'm going to give it a name. Okay, let me see. Let me create that without a description. I thought it would. Okay, so now I do have a potential bucket selected. It's showing bucket number 21, test bucket. Now I can add it to the bucket. And you see that now my pending users is now 0, but my bucket view is 1. So if I click on this tab, you'll see that my barcode has been moved over to the bucket. I can click on this. Obviously, if you're doing a bucket, you probably want to do a similar action for more than one patron. But just for the sake of this exercise, we can just show this one. And under actions, I can individually edit selected users. I can remove it from the bucket. One of the things that I can batch modify statistical categories if I want. So if I did a batch edit all users, you can also delete all users, which we don't want to delete my account because I use it for testing. But it shows you the kinds of things that you can change. So you need to give a name for your edit set, and then indicate which of these that you want to change. So it allows you to change the expiration date on a group of patrons, change the juvenile flag, the active flag, the barred flag, as well as the profile group. So if you wanted to change a bunch of juvenile patrons over to full privileges, this would be a nice way to do it off of a report, grabbing all those barcodes. So I'll cancel that at this point.
Beth, can you hear me? This is Anna.
I can hear you, Anna.
Oh, okay. So I was having audio issues before, but so now I'm on a phone call and that's working. I saw on there that it said that there was in the options you could modify the home library. But is that still only modify the home library within your system? So for instance, we couldn't have, say, a patron from the Dalles who moved to Hood River and wanted to change their card from an Hood River, a Dalles card to a Hood River card and just change the home library that way, could we?
Well, it depends on how the permissions are set, Anna. From my recollection, it seemed like there is the ability to change the home library if a patron has moved.
Because we tried that the other day by trying to, we tried to do that in the patron's account and then like add a new barcode, and it wouldn't go through. It like blocked it. We were even trying to, we did a clone and save to try and create a new account, but it held on to the home library for the cloned account and then wouldn't let us change that. And so I'm wondering if it also won't let us change it in this batch editing, or if this is like completely kind of is managed separately.
Yeah, I would think that the same permissions would carry over, but I don't know that changing the home library would be a good thing to do with a bunch of patron records. I guess the only application I could see if, say like a school, the middle school wanted to, graduate all of these patrons over to the high school. And so, maybe there would be a batch edit to change it from the middle school to the high school. But I don't think in the public library environment, a batch mode seems to make sense. But
yeah, I'm only asking just because it did have that home library option in here, and it seems like since we can't edit the home library in an individual account, that it's odd that it would give us that option here. And maybe there's and like you said, like right now we have a lot of the high school is trying to get a lot of kids to set up accounts here, and so that could be, one way of maybe on the high school end of like kind of not necessarily transit. Obviously, this isn't letting us clone accounts, but I don't know. It just seems odd that we would have that option here for batch editing when we don't seem to be able to do that on an individual level.
Yeah, I've heard of other cases where somebody has changed that. So that's why I'm wondering whether there was, we need to look at permissions or we need to look at special circumstances. What I'm going to do is, because I can change it back, I'm going to go ahead and test a batch edit on my record, changing the home library to WCL, and let's see what happens. Okay. So I am now Baker County Library patron. So if we went
it worked there.
It did work here. There again, I'm logged in with a whole different set of permissions. So I think what would be good to do, Anna, is to try this.
Like on my logged in as me, as opposed to logged in, because we were at the CERC desk, obviously, before, which raises another question. We were wondering if it looked like maybe there were some issues, right, with logins not necessarily respecting their permissions in the web client.
Oh, are you talking from a cataloging perspective, Hannah?
Yeah, and just like wondering if suddenly, if it seemed like we were having some issues with that, and then we had started wondering about that here prior to our cataloging discussion, because we thought maybe that CERC staff had suddenly these new permissions that we didn't expect them to have.
Actually, they don't. I did find out what was going on with those particular accounts. So we don't have to worry that the basic CERC permission group has all of a sudden morphed. But if you are having a problem changing the home library, let's look into that in a separate session, or create a ticket for us, and we'll take a look at it, because I think it's probably login specific, unless somebody is indicating that they're having a problem. Another individual is indicating that they're having problems with that too. So this was just an overview of the batch. Kind of take a look at it and see if you can find an application. One of the things you can do is you can actually roll back your batch edit. So if you mess something up, you can reverse it, which is a very nice feature. So, so select edit to roll back. I can do this and roll back the changes, and I'm back to Union Carnegie Public. So this is a nice safety feature. I love it. And I'm trying to think of anything else. Yeah, obviously we can look at this in more detail, but it gives you a good overview of what you can do with the user buckets. So back to the circulation menu. Record in-house use is another thing that some libraries do. Others haven't really utilized the feature. This allows you to record things that have been just used in the library, not actually been checked out. Things like your reference books or magazines that the patron just leaves on the table. You could bring those to the desk, scan them in, and it would record in-house usage for those particular items. And I do take this into account when I'm pulling the statistics. So something you could implement if you haven't already.
Beth, I have a question about that. This is Anna again.
Yeah.
I noticed that, because sometimes, when items are lying around, and we use the record in-house use, but sometimes what happens is an item might be lying around and it's potentially an item that someone had checked out and, left on a desk instead of bringing it up. And so I noticed that with record in-house use, right, all it does is record that somebody used it, I guess, for statistical purposes, but it doesn't seem to be able to identify that something was maybe checked out and needs to now be checked in, because obviously if we're scanning it in as record in-house use, it means that it's physically present. Do you know anything about that?
No, it sounds like that would be a nice additional feature to request, that it does a double check on the status to see what its status is, and then maybe has a pop-up message. That functionality, I haven't heard of. I mean, I can see if anybody else has put it on a wish list for the Evergreen developers. But I think probably if I was worried that that was happening, I probably would record the in-house use. And then since I already have it at the circ desk, I would go ahead and check it in, just to double check.
It would definitely be nice to have that. It's only happened occasionally, but it's one of those things where it would be a great feature if it, was also somehow scanning the status and able to have that pop-up message. Oh, this is a missing item. What do you want us to do?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I'm making a note of that, Anna.
Thank you.
And obviously you can change the number on this. Most of the time it's just going to be 1, but you can alter the number to whatever you want there. Okay, under circulation, let's go to the hold shelf. Right now with the web client, it does not appear that we can sort the hold shelf by anything, because I'm hovering over this and not seeing any underlines, but I know that that is something that has been improved upon for one of a future upgrade, because I saw it in the list of features. One of the things you can do, obviously, show clearable holds. Takes a few seconds, and then it shows them, and you have the ability to clear these holds. Okay, which I'm not going to do. The other thing that you could do is if you wanted to export this list for any reason, obviously you can print it, but if you wanted to bring this into a spreadsheet and do some sorting, or you could download the full CSV, which is something I've had at a couple places that they wanted to do. Trying to think of, if I click on one of these, obviously the actions menu shows some things that you can do with it. Most of the time, you're just wanting to clear these holds and get them off the hold shelf, though. Okay. Any questions about the hold shelf before we move on? This is a repetition of things that I've covered in other Circ sessions, but just a reminder that you can alter the order of these things by just dragging, so that if you wanted the shelf expire time to be listed first, you could do that. And if you like the way that's presenting, you can come over here and save columns. And so the next time you come in, that shelf expire time will be listed first. You also have the ability to remove things from this list because there's a lot of things listed. Anything in green is displaying as a column, and you can uncheck that if you want to. Just remember to save columns if you want to save that change from session to session. Replace barcode is pretty self-explanatory. Nice to have it in the menu, but not something we have to do on a regular basis. This is another an access point for item status, where you can scan barcodes in individually, or bring a file of barcodes in to do a particular action on the entire file.
Beth, this is Anna again. Do we know if there are going to be any updates in the way this functions? Because I think I mentioned this to you before. If you're in what was the old item status, right, and you scanned in a bunch of items and then selected them all to check all of the items in at once, which is what we do when checking in new items that we're adding to the collection. One of the things that, right, in the old item status, it would just refresh the page and then you would have the new status appearing on that page. But with the web client, what happens is that it adds that list, that anytime you change something to an item on the item status list here, it will add a new entry. And it becomes very confusing because it's not updating the actual list, it's adding a whole new list on top of your list. So then if you had, say, 50 items there, you would now have 100 items in your list. And it's it's a bit clunky compared to what was happening in the old system. So do we know about any updates to that?
I will check on that, Anna. I am not sure off the top of my head. I know that I'm trying to remember whether this is specific to check-in or with trying to remember if I've done an edit item on a group of records, whether it did the same thing. So I'll check into both of those to see whether it's unique to check-in or whether any change we make on a group of records in item status is going to create a new list.
Right. Yeah, I can't remember now if we just edit the status if it adds it. And I mean, it does seem like it must be tied into the fact that the page doesn't it doesn't quite refresh itself in the same way as, I mean, obviously it still is it has some greater refresh capabilities than a lot of the other pages in the web client, right? Which we add things and it just sits there and you have no idea that it's added. And this does have some capabilities. It's just kind of a tricky one.
It is, and it's a very good question. And I know they have made a lot of updates to the software, and I actually sat down and collected all of those update descriptions. And so I'm going to be putting together a web page with all of the new features plus all of the bug fixes or things that they have changed with the way the software works currently that we're going to be able to take advantage of in the new upgrade. So because I just grabbed all of that and didn't pour over it and read all the details, it could be that this is listed in there. But if we're noticing it, chances are that there's other Evergreen staff members out there who are noticing it too and submitting a ticket for that to be improved on in the new web client versions. So I will check on that and get back to you. And I'm looking at our time and thinking that we should probably wrap things up, but I want to make sure that I give everybody an opportunity to ask any additional questions before we sign off. Obviously, we're going to do some future sessions, and if there's specific things that you would like to do in a session, please let me know.
I do have a question. Sorry, I don't want to monopolize. If other people have questions, I did have a question with the specifically with the group accounts.
Okay.
And linking the parent and child accounts. So I know that there's some. It looks like maybe some got carried over from the desktop client, because I know that when we first started using the web client, it looked like there were some group accounts that already existed that we hadn't ourselves put in. So something might have gotten carried over, and I'm not sure how they were, how the system determined what got automatically made into a group account.
I've seen some examples of that, Anna, and I'm not sure how that happened either. Were these regular patrons? The one I came across was actually a group of libraries that ended up being combined together for whatever reason, and I actually removed that group. But are you seeing this with patrons and family members or just random patrons?
Yeah, well, well, right. I guess we don't know whether it was random patrons. It looked like it was probably family members, but you never
Okay.
know, right? We didn't ask the patron.
Yeah, all the
So,
groups should still be there that were there before. What Anna and I have noticed is that there seem to be some additional groups that have been created, and we don't know why the system put them together. Um, but without specific examples, I can't really kind of dig down and figure out what occurred. So, are you thinking that we might need to pull a report, Anna, and look at groups and group members, or what do you think we should do
yeah,
at this point?
it might be worthwhile because as I said, we're not quite sure how the system determined that. Like what specific? It looked like it must have been based on like phone number or something, which, right, the desktop client, if somebody had, right, when we get a message, if somebody had the identical, was it phone number and address, and then a message would pop up.
Yes, yeah, that's it.
And so I don't know if
Yeah,
that was what it was going on, like if all of the information had to be matching for it to say, okay, here's a group. Because it doesn't seem like it happened just based on phone number. But I
yeah,
don't know, I don't know what other people have noticed. It's always hard to, it's one of those things where, because it's so random, it's hard to retrieve those to see what's happening. It's just kind of like, oh, suddenly you see that there are group finds, and so there must be some sort of group associated with this account.
yeah. So what I'll do is I'll between John and I will pull a report of groups in the system and the group members and see if we can find a common create date that is suspiciously right around the upgrade time to see if there were groups that were created as a result of the upgrade. At least that's kind of where I'm going to try heading that direction and see if we can find some clues. But it's not happening on a ton of patrons, so there's got to
Right.
be something unique about these records if there was a group that was created that library staff did not create. But it would be good for us to know this, so we'll investigate that.
Okay, thank you. And I have another question with regard to those group accounts.
Yeah.
So, and I don't remember if it happened this way, but so you know how so we've got on the side, we'll have the group finds lit up.
Yeah.
And if you go and pay the bill, so it looks like right there, it's showing group finds on your account.
Uh-huh.
Can you go and pay this on your account, and will it apply that amount to the appropriate account, or do you actually have to?
You actually
I
have
had the
to go
feeling that,
into the group. So you have to go into whatever patron has that fines. So let's bring the group up under other group member details. Refresh the screen so it'll actually show them. And now you can see that, oh, Jennifer's the one that has the money owed. So I can go to her account, retrieve selected patrons, and then I would go into her bills and take care of the amount owed.
okay, so we still then have to go into each account and apply the
Yes.
appropriate payments.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I mean, I guess there are good and bad things to that, but at least that's clear. Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Okay, and John is indicating that there's a bug with paying fines where it doesn't always close the transaction after being paid. So that'd be a good bug to look at to see when it's been resolved, and a cautionary note that we need to check and make sure that things have gotten resolved in the account.
Yeah, we've definitely had that problem as well, and in particular, like where accounts have stayed blocked because the bills weren't applying properly, or the payments weren't applying properly.
Yeah, and sometimes that's something we can fix on the database end, because in the examples I've been given so far, it's one of the dates hasn't been updated, and that's something we can fix at the database end, and then it magically makes the patron's record okay. So yeah, we'll keep an eye on that particular bug. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Hope you learned something, and I'll be sending out a notice for future Circ sessions a little bit later. Hope everybody has a good rest of the day.